Support for Headline Humboldt is made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
The fate of NPR and PBS, as well as Key TV, looks grim after the Senate decides to approve President Donald Trump's rescission of funding. Also, poet Jodie Hollander joins us to preview an upcoming poetry workshop at Redwood National Park that seeks to reconnect and revitalize both the written and natural worlds. Coming up now on Headline Humboldt.
From the top of Humboldt Hill, this is Headline Humboldt. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. As of our deadline this week, the U.S. Senate has approved President Donald Trump's plan to claw back more than $1 billion in funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The U.S. House, minus a miracle, seems poised to reapprove the rescission and eliminate federal funding for NPR, PBS, and by association, Keat TV. Next week, we'll sit down with Keat General Manager David Gordon to discuss what this means for our local station and all of its programming, employees, and the broader community. Hard choices will have to be made. Whatever Keat has been in the past, throughout the more than 50 years of its history serving this community, seems likely to change and do so dramatically. People may lose their jobs. Programming may have to evolve. Closure is possible. But for as long as this show stays on the air, here at the top of Humboldt Hill, we'll do our absolute best to keep you informed and educated on the issues that matter to you and this community. It has been an honor to sit in this chair every week and include you in these conversations about politics, people, passion, and power. Thank you. Our guest tonight is poet Jodie Hollander, whose Poetry in the Parks program is coming to Redwood National Park. But first, the news. As of deadline this week, the rescission of funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting has passed the U.S. Senate and required only a reapproval by the House of Representatives due to amendments made. That last step seems likely to occur just prior to this show's airing. CPB stands to lose $1.1 billion meant to fund it through the next 2 years, while the bill also cuts $7.9 billion in other programs from U.S. aid international relief programs. CPB acts as a conduit for federal money to NPR, PBS, and their member stations, including this one. Every Democrat voted against the measure and were joined by Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. Democratic Senator Tina Smith missed the vote due to a sudden hospitalization. Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar spoke vehemently on the Senate floor about why rural residents of her state need public broadcasting.
And this clawback doesn't just eliminate funding for, say, NPR, PBS. The primary impact of that part of the funding cuts is going to be on local radio and TV. 1,500 local public media stations across the country that receive 70% of this funding, jeopardizing these stations that provide local community services. Stripping this funding is an attack on these local stations, yes, but it is the communities. I know, because I know some of my communities that rely on these stations. Grand Marais, Minnesota, the very tip of our state, the tip of Minnesota. Do you think all these other stations are covering the Canadian wildfires hourly? They do, because of the smoke, and people need to know the air quality when they're making decisions about what they're going to do that day or the next day. Do you think people know when on Highway 61 there's a tree over the road, or there's been a deer that's been hit by a car and No, they hear it on WTIP. Or in Bemidji, Minnesota, which has had some really, really difficult storms lately that took down so many structures and houses. They are able to get the kind of news that they need on that station. Their newspaper is now, for the most part, online, and so they need these TV and radio stations that give them the information that they need. I've had several Republicans from my state write me, former state legislators who are on the boards of these TVs. They also view it as a way of the local TV station in Austin, Minnesota. The former Republican leader in the state Senate is on the board. I visited with him recently when I was down there, and this is the place in Austin, Albert Lee area near the Iowa border, where they're able to get their unique news that gathers people together, that brings them together. And then there's the emergency alerts. Earlier this month, we were tragically reminded of the importance of this. Texas, New Mexico, the fires in Arizona. We rely on this information in local communities to know what to do and what's safe. This isn't a partisan issue. 77% of Republicans and 78% of Democrats report relying on public radio for emergency alerts and news. That's part of the reason why for a half a century we have agreed on a bipartisan basis in the U.S. Senate to invest in public broadcasting. Yet now, congressional Republicans are using a partisan process to rubber stamp the president's unchecked power and rip away these resources, despite the fact that the American people support this on a 2-to-1 margin. I think about these stations in Duluth, in Granite Falls, in Austin, and every week 20 million people across the country actually listen to radio programs that were started out of our local Minnesota Public Radio, maybe Prairie Home Companion. They're listening to some of those former broadcasts, and they make them smile, and they make seniors feel happy when they're alone in the assisted living. Or maybe Marketplace, that also started in my state, and they're able to get the facts. They're able to get news about what's happening with the economy and interesting stories. I think a constituent of mine said it best. Public media serves us in many ways. We live in the middle of the country. We only watch PBS and listen to public radio, which provides local news coverage, arts programs, and thoughtful discussions on a wide variety of topics, in their words, without loud argument or obnoxious advertising. It provides information on local disasters, such as we recently experienced here in Bemidji. That's where Paul Bunyan is from, or that's where the statue is. Because of the reporting done on that devastating event, we were able to learn what was happening to the people and how we could help. We must support these vital resources that give voice to important local issues. To conclude, as a daughter of a newspaperman, I know how important public media and the free press are to strengthening our democracy. Hacking away at public broadcasting and international aid is not just short-sighted, it's dangerous. These investments are relatively small in cost, yet immense in impact. They strengthen our country and strengthen our leadership. And we ask our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to look at what this means for our role in the world. We have 3 independent branches of government. We have a process that, just as Senator Murray is here, that Senator Collins and Senator Murray showed just last week, can be bipartisan, where we agree on budget amounts going forward. We have the power of the purse. We're Article 1 in the Constitution, and we better show our power instead of just being rolled and being members over there who are rubber stamping this president. Stand up and do your job.
I'm willing to bet our Paul Bunyan statue is bigger than their Paul Bunyan statue. We'll be right back after the short break.
I have 28 yellow buttons in my button collection.
My 3-year-old was inspired by Carl to ask for a button collection for Christmas. I posted Naomi opening her presents.
A button collection! This was just what I wanted!
And the video really touched people's hearts. We started to get packages every day of buttons from people from around the world. It's hard to believe this huge community formed over Carl the Collector. PBS Kids makes shows that connect us.
Here's our interview with poet Jodie Hollander, whose Poetry in the Parks program will host 3 poetry workshops at Redwood National Park over the weekend of August 1st. Her work has appeared in several high-profile literary magazines, including The Atlantic Monthly.
Poetry is a form of distillation of a truth that maybe comes in from an unexpected angle, would be my off-the-cuff definition of what is poetry. I would also add that poetry is something that we need now more than ever so badly. Many of us may not know we need it, but we need it.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned that it's sort of like a truth or insight that comes almost suddenly. It's sort of, it's a paraphrasing. But in today's age, it seems like that we're living in a time of relative truth and where truth is often batted around. What do you think is the power of, an art form that seeks to distill, information and give it a clarity that is beyond maybe, factual truth to something deeper than that?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I think now more than ever, we need to reconnect with something authentic. We have so many artificial things around us that the ability to find some kind of internal truth, both through poetry and through nature, is the most healing thing I can think of right now in July of 2025.
I've done some reading of your work, and I'm not going to try to make any bold, declarative statements about your subject matter, but it seems like you're dealing a lot with nature and family and a little bit of trauma and
Yeah.
those sorts of things. And I think that we're all, in some sense, living with those elements, although maybe we're disconnected from it, and that may be part of the dis-ease that a lot of us are feeling. But I mean, how would you define your relationship with poetry? What does it do for you personally?
Poetry is something that's been sort of inside of me for my entire life. I can't ever remember a time when I wasn't interested in reading poetry, writing poetry. So it's baked into me in such an integral way that I can't really imagine a life without it. I know there were times in my life when I didn't know how to pursue a life as a poet, and I was still around poetry. I was teaching high school English and focusing on poetry. Um, but it's always felt to me like my given means of expression, whether that be for something inspirational or working through something a little bit darker or finding meaning in the ordinary. It's sort of felt to me like being a poet was something that I had to do. It wasn't even a choice. I didn't think, oh, maybe I'll be a poet. It just always sort of felt like this is what I'm supposed to do with my life.
You mentioned before that we're surrounded by so many artificial things, and part of what we're here to talk about is the Poetry in the Parks program, which you're responsible, I think, for developing and will be coming up to the North Coast
Yeah.
in a short while. And it's going to give people an opportunity to kind of explore that for themselves. But in an age where, AI is starting to become ascendant, we live on social media. A lot of people have gotten away from the arts and in particular, poetry as a medium.
Yeah.
Um, how do you think that, exploring something as simple as, and obviously not simple, but simpler as, poetics can help our society find itself again in terms of who we are as human beings rather than what we are connected to all the time?
Yes, I love that question, because we need this now. We really do. Poetry has a way, particularly when it's set in a natural space, like a national park or a national forest or a national monument. It has a way of bringing us back to ourselves, bringing us back to a place of authenticity and truth. Maybe it'll bring us back to a favorite childhood memory. Maybe it'll connect us with a ponderosa pine tree in a new and unexpected way. Um, but I think one of the great things about poetry in the parks is that it brings together two vital things for our human souls, at least for my soul, nature and poetry. And there's a lot of buzz, there's a lot of time people spend on the internet. AI is taking off, and poetry will sort of harken back to our original nature, to something archaic, a truth, unveiling maybe truths that even we didn't know we had. So this is a program I started in 2018, even before I was a resident of Arizona. And the idea was to help people connect to their public lands, to make a deeper connection to their public lands through writing poems. And one of the things I really like about this project is that it's open to everyone. It's not poetry being only in academia. The poetry workshops are free and they're sponsored by the national parks, or in the case of Redwood's Conservancy. And they're open to everyone, all levels. So you don't need any experience to come into these workshops. Just an open mind and an interest in the natural world and an interest in words. And I think people find they really surprise themselves in these workshops. They say, oh, I'm not a poet. I don't know what I'm doing. I've never written, or they'll come in and say, I'm a fiction writer. I'm not good at poetry. And they'll surprise themselves by what they found from within that came out onto a piece of paper or even onto their computer screen that they didn't know was there. And that's really a sort of exciting and exhilarating moment for me as an instructor. And, the other thing I would like to say is that the workshops are always a safe space to explore whatever it is people want to explore within themselves, whether it's traumatic or inspirational or just reflective. This program actually started at Walnut Canyon National Monument here in Flagstaff, and I was really excited by the number of people that came and loved it and wanted to write more poems and wanted to do more workshops. And then the program expanded, and I've been invited to places like Sitka National Park and Joshua Tree, and PBS filmed us down at Saguaro last year. So the program's really expanding, and the fact that it's still thriving amidst these frightening government cuts is really heartening to me. It's giving me a lot of hope. So in places where maybe the national parks themselves don't have the funds to do this, places like the Redwoods Conservancy are stepping up and supporting it. So it's really special that this is still going, and I'm just very hopeful that it can continue to thrive throughout this administration.
Yeah. One of the things that, poetry in the parks, you're going to these different parks, and I'm assuming, so if I make a mistake in this, correct me. But I mean, part of it's about finding creative inspiration in the land that's surrounding you, but
Yes.
the person is always there, the
Yes.
author, and so you're exploring the author's exploring themselves in the work, but then also how it connects to place and nature around them. And can you talk about how traveling to these different places and exploring them literarily, if that's a word, helps you to find different parts of yourself?
Absolutely. One of the most exciting things about these workshops is that we blend the outer landscape with the inner landscape, exactly as you said. And what the poems that come out of these workshops are, they're extraordinary. People think they're not going to be able to write a poem, and they always do, because there is something about the blending of those two landscapes that I think all poets really rely on to some extent. If we think about some of the greatest poets like Robert Frost, Sylvia Plath, Ted Hughes, they relied very heavily on some blending between the outer landscape and the inner landscape. And that combination creates usually something sort of magical and maybe even inspirational. The other thing I wanted to say is that we really need protection of our public lands, and oftentimes making that personal connection to a public land by writing a poem can help people to become better advocates for their public lands. So someone will remember, oh my gosh, I wrote a poem at Saguaro National Park West. They need money, maybe I'll donate to them. I don't know if it happens quite in that exact way, but I think
Yeah.
it does make a difference if people can make that personal connection to a natural park, a national forest, a national monument.
So can you describe for us briefly what happens at these poetry workshops so people could get a sense of what they might anticipate?
Yes, and I will say I am doing my dream job right now. So, we start off with introductions where we just kind of get a chance to know each other. We'll share our names, maybe a little bit about our background. We'll start off by looking at some poetic terms. There's no quiz at the end. It's just so that we're all on the same page. And so if we're talking about line breaks, enjambment versus an end stop line, or if we're talking about something like assonance, consonance, or alliteration, we all are sort of familiar with what those terms mean. So we'll go over those briefly, and then we'll look at some examples of celebrated poems that employ some of the tools that we talk about. So, for example, there's a James Wright poem called A Blessing that I like to use a lot at these workshops. And we'll look at the different line breaks, and someone in the workshop will say, I wonder why he chose to use the enjambment in that line versus an end stopped line. And somebody else might point out the use of sound in that poem. And in that particular poem, there's always a sort of debate about the ending of the poem, which makes it really exciting too. So we'll look at some celebrated poems, generally poems that are nature poems, that do really bring out that blend of inner and outer landscape, and have a real discussion about it. A lot of people have said to me, "Oh, this reminds me of when I was in college and we got to pick apart poems. I haven't done this in years." So it's a lot of fun. And then from there, I give people some writing prompts where I'll give them usually three, and depending on time, anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes to work on each of the three writing prompts. And they are based on some kind of natural idea that they're to write about. And they're very open-ended. They'll be, something along the lines of find something in nature that reflects hope to you, or find something in your immediate environment that reminds you of being a child. They're very open-ended, and the idea is that the poet can take these writing prompts in any direction that they want. They're going to let their minds go wherever their minds want to go, and sort of see what happens. They're not writing poems, they're just free writing. They're allowing themselves to write whatever comes out. Then we come back, and out of the free writes, they craft a first draft of a poem. And they have a limited amount of time to do that, 10 or 15 minutes. And nobody ever thinks they can do it. They always say, "Oh, I'm not going to be able to do it," or "Whatever I write is going to be terrible." And every time, these poems, they're incredible. They're some of them are otherworldly. They're amazing. And then we share them, and sometimes we just listen to them. Other times we'll give feedback. And then at the end of class, there's some time for questions. And another thing that I'll say that's great about these workshops is that there's so much fun, and almost always people end up making friends at these workshops and exchanging emails or phone numbers and saying, "Let's keep in touch, let's send poems to each other." So it just, it's a win for everyone. And sometimes also the parks will post the poems with the permission of the poet on their social media sites too, which is always fun.
Yeah, always a thrill for the folks who get published that way. Um, can you explain for folks how they might sign up? I mean, it's rather pedestrian, but people, if they want to figure out how they have the time or whatever else, how can they
They
figure out
have
the
to,
dates?
yes, they have time. So the first two workshops are free, but they are limited to 25 participants. And if you go to the Redwoods National Parks or the Redwoods Parks Conservancy website, there'll be a flyer up there with a QR code that you can scan and sign up. If somebody doesn't have an iPhone or the ability to take a picture, they can always call the Redwoods Conservancy or call Redwoods National Park and also sign up that way. But we really encourage everyone who's interested, even if you're a little on the fence, you're like, "Oh, I don't know, I'm not very good at poetry, but maybe this sounds interesting." You should come, because it's usually just a matter of getting in the door and coming. And it's wonderful. It's really wonderful for everyone.
I imagine it can be a transformative experience for folks who, get out in the woods and, explore themselves and others and figure out once again what it means to sort of have a communal experience artistically, spiritually, and everything else. It sounds absolutely profound.
It is. And I will say too that, poetic friendships, they tend to be very deep. And because when we write poems, we're so vulnerable that the friends that we make in the poetry world tend to be incredibly intense and deep and meaningful friendships. So that's a really special part of this too, is I would say the friendships that people make with each other.
Yeah. Do you think that you could read us a poem of yours that sort of reflects the mood of what you might be looking for in these workshops?
Sure. And I'll just say I'm not looking necessarily for anything in particular.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
I'm hoping that that the people that come and join this workshop will be able to, explore whatever it is that they want to explore. And I often say things like, if my writing prompt is to write about a tree and you end up writing about an experience at church at 10 years old, great. Let your mind go wherever it wants to go. And when we let our mind we unleash things and let things run free, that's when the best poetry comes, I think. So I will read a horse poem.
Okay.
I write a lot about horses and I try to limit myself to 3 or 4 horse poems a book. But this is the title poem of my first book. So my first book is My Dark Horses, which came out with Liverpool and Oxford University Press in 2017. And my second poem is Nocturne, which came out with the same press in 2023. But this is My Dark Horses. Just put my glasses on for this. If only I were more like my dark horses, I wouldn't have to worry all the time that I was running too little and resting too much. I'd spend my hours grazing in the sunlight, taking long naps in the vast pastures. And when it was time to move along, I'd know. I'd spend some time with all those I'd loved, then disappear into a gathering of trees. If only I were more like my dark horses, I wouldn't be so frightened of the storms. Instead, when the clouds began to gather and fill, I'd make my way calmly to the shed and stand close to all the other horses. Together, we'd let the rain fall round us, knowing as darkness passes overhead that above all, this is the time to be still.
That's it for this week. Next week, we'll speak with KEAT Executive Director David Gordon about how these new funding cuts will impact this public television station. Stay tuned, stay informed.